How to be an older athlete. Bloody hell.
Oh, man. This is useful for some people. I'm going to call you out in this
For
podcast.
a lot of people.
All right.
Not for me.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Welcome to the LNT Podcast. It's a lifestyle where Robin and I talk about lots of stuff. And in particular today, today's topic is all about becoming or being an athlete at an older age or as your age progresses or advances. Okay, so what would you say? What's the age group? Because I'm thinking maybe 30s and over that this podcast is going to be useful for.
Well, I felt a big difference from going from, okay, let's just say all through my 20s to my 30s. If I were to compare like my 28-year-old self to my 38-year-old self, there's a big difference. And I guess that's what we're going to be talking about, right?
Exactly.
Eventually. So I would say, let's just say, to make things simplified, we'll just go with the 30 and over.
Yeah, 30 and over. I think 30s definitely will be very, very beneficial. 40s as well. But even there's a lot to take away from this podcast in terms of advancing age and how to, I guess, listen to your body and how things are going. But also if you are in your 20s or especially late 20s and you're thinking you're trying to plan in advance or just get a little bit more information of what to expect, I guess, of your body and expectations versus reality in terms of both, I guess. We're going to split this podcast. Initially, we're going to be talking about injury management because that's a huge thing, especially with advancing age. And you hear it so much, I guess, so many things that you hear it so much. Oh, I'm too old now. I'm too old for this. I'm too old for that, which is a stereotype, which we shouldn't listen to, but we should take it with a grain of salt and really pay attention to injury management. And that's more emphasized with advancing age, I guess.
I think it's like people need to look at it as like, I'm getting older. But that's not the reason why things are occurring. And that's the big difference. Like, okay, what strategies can I put in place to decrease me feeling like it's an age dependency that's making me feel tired, lethargic, sore, stiff, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
So hopefully, man, we can gain some insight and people sort of resonate with what we're going to be sharing today.
That'll be amazing. Yeah. And once we've talked about the injury management aspect, we'll actually shift it and transition and start thinking about performance. And funnily enough, there are actually some advantages with advancing age in terms of performance. We'll talk about that later, but specifically more in terms of experience in your field of sport that advances and you grow with that. So there's lots of advantages to take away from, to think about as well.
Yep.
And after that, we'll be talking also about mindset.
Which gets better with age.
Exactly. And also how to change your mindset with age as well, I think is important. We can't always be thinking like we're 18, 19 when we're performing at high level, when we're 35 onwards. Like some people. So without further ado, we'll start with injury management and being an older athlete and what does that mean for you, injury management?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question. No, I think, okay, so if I'm looking at personal experiences, right? Now, let's be realistic. Depending on what sports you're playing, you can't stop an injury, but you can at least minimize how severely injured you'll get and to what degree injury you'll get. So example, like I know there's a lot of people that still do like kickboxing or Muay Thai or MMA, even like, high UFC champions that are still competing over the age of 35 that are doing really, really well. Now in that sort of sport, to say that, you're going to eliminate all injuries is very challenging. However, you can minimize. So for me, like the injury management is like being able to look at what are you doing to maintain like a good length tension relationship on your body, like physically. So if I were to think about me personally, it's like, okay, so being able to keep my body as strong as possible through a full range.
I see.
So then I'm looking at, okay, so am I just strength training in the inner range and only getting strong in the inner range, where with the sport of jiu-jitsu?
What does that mean for those people for inner range and length tension relationship?
So looking at somebody that's like only doing a partial rep of any exercise. So example, like most people, I think they can resonate with like a bench press. So lowering the bar all the way to the chest and then pressing out, then like foot being soft at the elbows, but nearly going to full extension. So as an example for me, is like one of the things I could do for injury mitigation and prevention is that being able to train into that full range, because my tissue under my sporting load is going to go through that full range.
I see.
And even this this gentleman that I've been working with, he keeps on getting a hamstring injury.
Yeah.
And this is where him and I were talking about two things that actually occurring with his hamstring. Is first thing is when we actually tested his length, lying on his back, he could only get his leg to 30 degrees, so not very far off the ground. So if I were to put in a measurement, it might be like 60 centimeters off the ground, and he could feel extreme tightness. And then we measured his strength within that same sort of range, and his side that's injured or keeps on getting injured was a lot weaker than his opposing side. So I said to him, it's very simple. We actually need to get the length in that muscle and then the strength in that muscle, like simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, like that's a really, really big part, because I know a lot of people will do their sport, but they won't do the accessory work to help their body maintain that sport.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me for the injury prevention work, is looking at the strength and the length side.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So working the joints through maximum range or acceptable range for that individual, and making sure they are strong in all those different ranges. It's very, very important.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that, bro, because it's not only for older athletes, but it's actually something we discuss with throughout all ages, and how important it is to have stability and strength throughout the range, because, and especially depending on your sport, like you said, with MMA, or jiu-jitsu and different disciplines like that, those joints are really taken into excessive range or end range of motion, and not being strong or stable, or not having trained in those ranges, you're obviously susceptible to injury, no matter what age you are. But obviously with advancing age, you definitely need to hone in and target those particular things.
Yeah, well, I've noticed a lot, like a huge deficit in my own personal mobility, and that's what I need to work at a lot. And so
me too.
Another thing is that even for me being able to do a bodyweight squat, so if I compare to a decade ago, I could do that movement, no warm-up, and hit rock bottom, no problem at all. And this is through all joints, because I know that if we're looking at a squat individually, if we think about what's mechanically moving, we know that ankle joints involved, the associated muscles, knee joints involved, associated muscles, and then the hips, and then having to stabilize through your back. But I know that my ankles, knees, and hips are a lot stiffer than what they used to be.
Yeah.
So then for me, then I'm like, okay, well, if I want to be able to perform such a movement just in a simple gym setting, then I need to then progress my mobility even further, because if I am not training into those movement patterns and I lose those movement patterns, then you start to lose function.
Yeah.
And then as the decades go on, and that's another thing to do with like prevention of any injury, right? Or just prevention of losing of movement, is to be able to train into those movements. So when, when we're dealing with someone that's like 50 and 60 and they're like, oh, I struggle to get in and out of the car. Well, that's because they haven't even been like learning or maintaining a squat. So then you start to lose that function. So that's also part of like the injury management as an older individual, is like once you gain a function, maintain the function.
Yeah. And if you don't use it, simply
you lose
it's
it.
a cliche again, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And to add to that, on top of that, and it's going to depend on your sport and what you do, but majority or a lot of the sports are going to require not being strong in all ranges, but also being powerful or producing force and sometimes fast, more dynamic movements. As opposed to a bench press, you're pushing someone with power, or you're sprinting, you're doing these things. I will emphasize that these particular movements, they don't have to be the exact movements, but power movements and movements with speed need to also be implemented as part of a training program with older age. And that's very, very important, especially if you are going out there and playing sports. You know, I was at the football fields on the weekend, and it was really nice to see the football over 30s and over 35s, over 40s, over 45 teams all playing. It's amazing to see that, but it's interesting to see, you know, there's so many injuries at those ages as well. And it's because, you know, obviously there's time limitations, there's families in the way, which we'll discuss later. But it is important if you're wanting longevity and if you're wanting to perform throughout the whole season, whether it's jiu-jitsu, football, whatever it is, your trainings have to be somewhat specific. They don't have to be extremely intense, but for injury management, if you're going to be sprinting or if you're going to be pulling someone down into the mats with vigor, you should be doing some sort of explosive, fast movements in the gym, whether it's a powerful row, for example, for a pulling motion, or whether it's a trap bar deadlift with some speed at lower weights of 30% of what your 1RM is. Things like that need to be implemented in order for you to make sure you're taking your injury management protocol to the advanced
that's
stages.
back to that like sport specificity, right?
Absolutely.
That we've spoken about on previous podcasts is like preparing the body for the output that's about to occur.
Absolutely.
And that's crucial. And that's such a valid point what you just brought up about implementing the power training for preparation, because I think that's something that a lot of people actually stem away from as they get older, which there's more than enough literature to indicate that should be a serious component.
Absolutely.
For training to maintain that high level function, because even if we look at simply like running is actually very challenging exercise, and that produces a lot of force and a lot of power.
It's up to 4 to 5 times your body weight per step on a decent velocity run, I guess. We're not talking about a sprint. Sprint's even higher. So those forces, you know, a lot of people say, I can't do that in the gym anymore. I'm not 20 anymore. I can't do it, you know. But you're out there in the football field and you're doing all those movements. You're going to be in those positions where you're going to have to be required to do them anyway. So do not be afraid of it. Of course, when you watch videos of an Olympic athlete who's 21 years old doing them, they look very powerful and they're pushing very, very heavy weights. It doesn't mean you're going to be pushing the same weights, but those movements and the speed of those movements should be acquired in your training regimen, and you should try to execute them under a controlled environment. Of course, do seek, especially when it comes to complex lifts like that, if you're doing a clean, for example, do seek some professional advice in terms of making sure you're doing the right technique. And obviously there's a build up to it. You're going to be doing very light weights to get used to it first, and then advancing to more advanced technical lifts. But they don't always have to be technical. You know, they can be very controlled. You could literally do some power movements with machines. And that's very, very controlled and lower risk of injury. But yeah, to some degree, what you do in the weights room should mimic or complement what you're going to be doing out there in whatever performance, whatever sport you're doing.
And that goes back to, like if we're being specific for your sport, going back to like stretching and mobility. Is that the common muscle groups that you'll be using, or if you were to analyze and break down your own movement pattern with your sport, is that think about, okay, what muscle's actually lengthening if I stride and do a run? And then, you know, then would advise, well, that's the stretching, the mobility work that you want to work around after your sport or after your training. Absolutely.
And it's neglected. I've neglected it for a lot, and until the past 2 to 3 years where I've picked it up a lot more. But it's neglected so much. Even the people who enjoy training and enjoy going to the gym neglect mobility. It tends to be, especially with guys. I think we're really bad at it. Girls tend to be a little bit better, but even then, a lot of my female clients are not great with mobility.
They'll
It's
train, do
neglected.
their sport, right? And then
you're done.
They're done.
Absolutely.
Showered up, off to work.
Exactly, man. So it's so important, man. It's exactly what you said. Those movement patterns, if you're running, if you're in the jiu-jitsu mats, which requires so much rotation with the thorax and stuff, and if you're really stiff in your thorax, and thorax meaning your mid-back section, and you can't rotate, and if you're in a sport and someone's going to drag you with velocity, or if he's going to fall, he or she is going to fall on you and twist their back, expect something to pop, or expect something to go out, because it wasn't used to being taken into that range. So mobility is so crucial. It doesn't need to be, again, something so drastic. If you're doing 10 minutes a day and maybe two days a week, you're doing a little bit of a longer stretch of mobility, maybe 25, 30 minutes. It's nice. It's easy. You can multitask. You can spend time with your child. You can watch TV, or you can read something while doing a little bit of mobility. It doesn't have to be, all encompassing. But so important for injury management, simply because you need to take those joints where they're going to be taken anyway in your field of sport.
Yeah. And the older we get, the more our mobility just naturally is going to reduce.
Absolutely.
So it's important to combat that.
And the older we get, our recovery time, unfortunately, is reduced as well. There are some things in a cellular level, at a mitochondrial level, and in our bodies and through our biochemistry change with age. It does slow down. The same with our nerve impulses and reaction times. They change, okay? So, which makes it more emphasis on why we train power when we're getting older as well, because we're not going to be as reactive. And if you're, accepting a high load or high force when you're changing direction in a sport and you're not reactive enough, things tend to rip and rupture. Okay, so recovery time is crucial, and it's important to listen to your body. Okay, Robin, I'll let you add on this.
Yeah, unfortunately, so I'm sure we can all agree, right? As the decades go on, the simple things that we took advantage for, so being able to train, let's just say 6 days a week, and then being able to compete, let's just say every month, every 2 months, depending on what sport you're playing. Realistically, as the decade goes on, that's not apparent. So it takes muscles longer to recover from intense training sessions. It takes the joints longer for the natural inflammatory process to decrease. It takes longer for our nervous system to recover. We need a bit more sleep or decreased training in between. So for me, to optimize recovery is like, okay, how do I take care of my sleep, stay hydrated, eat well, and even when we're going into the training regime, is knowing that, okay, I may be able to train with intensity 2 or 3 times this week, and then I may have to do just off-peak, high-intense training maybe another 2 or 3 times a week. Because Marvin knows some of us learn the hard way with overtraining, or not really overtraining, but under recovery, which is quite different.
Absolutely.
Recovery is paramount if you want to be staying in the long game. So thinking like long term about being able to make subtle improvements week in and week out. So recovery is different for everyone. So for me, how I would recover is like if I'm having really good quality of sleep all the time, then I know I can have a little bit more output. However, if sleep's diminishing slightly for whatever reason, then I know maybe that training week I can't train as hard as I need to. And that's just from sleep. That's just from one modality from my recovery. I've got a steam sauna, which I use at night, which helps me with my sleep. And then that helps for me as like acting as like a muscle relaxant.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I can't use the steam sauna. Then I know that slows down my recovery. So then I know, I can't have the same output. So unfortunately, I have to know, am I doing everything right? Yes. Okay. High intense training. Are things missing? No, I have to pull back slightly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you really have to, like Robin said, it's different for everyone. Unfortunately, there's not one size fits all. It's not, I couldn't give a program to someone with this intensity, this frequency, and this volume and be like, you can do this 3 days a week, you will recover in time, and you will be able to do this, that. It's different for everyone. And what I will stress out is, again, we'll go back to the pillars, and the pillars are 99% of it, and that's the sleep, making sure you're getting enough sleep, your nutrition, which once we talk about the performance, we'll talk about that, because injury management and performance are very tightly knit together, and we can't talk about them separately. So we talk about sleep, as well as diet and nutrition, stress management. Those are your key 3 pillars, and of course your exercise and programming and how you're being programmed for those. Those 4 pillars are going to account for 99%. Don't go thinking, look, ice baths, fantastic, huge evidence on them. Saunas, huge evidence for recovery. Some supplementation, huge evidence. I've just mentioned the other pillars being 99%. So it doesn't matter how good your ice bath, saunas, and supplements are, they're only 1%. Okay, so if you're going to do a very high intensity exercise, to put it as an example, and you've just finished the exercise, and naturally it should take you 73 hours, 72 hours to recover, 3 days completely from that high intensity exercise. If you were perfectly done with your sauna and your ice bath, it should maybe nick off an hour of that 72, and that's over 1% difference. Okay, but if you're getting your sleep, your nutrition, all on lock, and it's not easy. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. Like Robin says, sometimes sleep, things get in the way. Stress management, all that, and your training program is good. You've got a great foundation. Okay, don't exchange that and think about the particular magic. There's a magic button that you can press and it will reverse you, and all of a sudden you accelerate and you're going to recover within half a day.
No shot.
Yeah,
no shot. We already know that if you're undersleeping, basically high systemic inflammation, your body won't recover.
Yeah.
Simple. Testosterone drops, which we can talk about on the performance side.
And we cannot reverse it in any other manner. We can help it, we can try aid it, but those pillars, you can be an absolutely, no matter what your age, if you've got those on lock and you're disciplined enough, you can be a fantastic athlete without doing anything else, without taking anything extra. Those last things are just a little bit of a spark, that little tip of the iceberg. But there's so much more encompassing with the basic pillars. They're boring to talk about because it's found, you'll hear it in every podcast, every book, because it's there. That's what's needed. It's the true gold standard, you know. All the additional stuff, sometimes there's a huge hype on them on social media, and I understand there's a lot of evidence behind them as well, but just remember that it accounts for that last 1%. So sometimes with social media, you kind of fully, it feels like a bigger thing. It feels like it's this is a game changer, and they sell it in that manner. This is going to change everything. But in reality, we'll always go back to the basics, and those are those are the gears of what makes the engine go.
Yeah. Well, if we look, so if we're talking about performance, right? Because you and I, we try our best with our sports.
Yeah.
Okay, so we really do. So if we're looking at the performance side, I always think about the fastest adapting specimen is actually a baby, right?
Yes.
They take everything on board. Their learning behavior, their coordination improves dramatically. They grow grow fast, right? And the biggest thing you think about, like a baby, is their sleep patterns, right? So they just sleep. So even for an older adult, so I know there's heaps of literature saying that older population doesn't need as much sleep. Well, if we put into context of, and we're talking here about trying to be an older athlete or an older individual that's wanting to be highly active, then you need to treat your sleep as something as essential for the performance side. So personally speaking, I know that when I'm rested well, and I'm talking like not just 2 or 3 nights a week, I'm talking continuously, my sleep needs to be on point, that my performance the following day when I'm well rested, I'm just stronger, faster, more focused, and I pick up the skill acquisition of my sport as well the following day. And then we know that, like, if you're learning a new pattern or your sport at night, and cognitively you got to think about what you're doing, it's been shown that even the short-term memory, it gets into our long-term memory, so that our performance will improve.
Yeah.
So, sleep for performance as an older athlete, older athlete, is absolutely vital.
Absolutely. And you touched on the mental aspect as well with sleep. your outlook on life almost changes when you're having enough sleep as opposed to when you're not. If you're not having or you're lacking sleep, you're more quickly, I am for sure, and I've seen it with different clients as well, that you're more quickly agitated. You're more pessimistic as opposed to optimistic.
I've got a question, like, because you play a big team sport, right?
Yeah.
If you're undersleeping and you're just feeling like agitated, have you ever taken it out on your teammate, or have you, I don't know, like clashed?
Been a little bit, absolutely.
And you realize like, oh, that's not me, but it's just...
Yeah, it does happen, man. Like I said, you're more pessimistic, or you're more blaming of another person as opposed to looking, as opposed to being patient and listening and looking within and sorting stuff out. There's so many cognitive things that happen when you're lacking sleep. It's actually insane. But the main thing is that you are a lot more pessimistic about life, let alone your sport. So you have a bad outlook, you have a negative outlook, and sometimes you'll say, this was absolutely terrible training session. I'll need to train more because this is, I'm angry at myself. I need to train more. Then you end up going in the overtraining pathway. It's a huge thing with the sleep. So that's why it's a huge pillar. It's not just like getting 8 hours of shut-eye. There's magical things that occur in that, where your perspective changes of your sport, your thinking more clearly on what to execute and what to take, how to interact with your teammates as well. It's how to interact with your coach if you have one. And a lot of things happen when you're getting good sleep and also when you're getting bad sleep. So it's very, very important. I cannot stress that enough.
What's your, because we know that sleep has like alterations hormonally with our body. Does that have any impact on your nutrition?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
What happens? Like, let's just say poor sleep, few days.
Yeah.
What happens for you, for your nutrition?
It's so, oh man, it's incredible. It's incredible. So, because I've read about this quite a lot, and I've read a few books and I've done a few studies on this, and I understand it. I'm a little bit more conscious of it when I'm lacking sleep. I know. So my cravings, for example, for sugar spike. For some reason, I'd like to miss breakfast, wait till I get really hungry and have a calorie-dense food meal as opposed to a nutritious dense meal. I'll first wake up not in the best mood, and I want to miss breakfast for some reason, or I'm not inclined to have my healthy breakfast, and I'll let that satiety level build up, and I want to crash it because I'm frustrated with something that's very calorie dense. And sugar is usually a thing. And now, this was when I was younger. Now I'm aware of it. Yeah. I know I've lacked sleep, and I know what my mind is doing and what my body, my microbiome wants me to eat. So I'll still have my breakfast and stuff. It takes a little bit of discipline, but sugar cravings for me,
so
particularly.
That's a good strategy for the older athlete that's performing, is being able to, even though you're sleep deprived, because I'm the same boat as you.
Yeah.
I wake up too tired where actually I don't want to eat, and I'll wait until I go into starvation mode.
Yeah.
But then unfortunately, and we've spoken about this before, is that once you miss breakfast or you start to extend that time restricted eating too long, you make up your calories at the back end of the day. And I do exactly that.
Yeah.
So I'm like you. So obviously aware of it. And this is for the older athletes. We're speaking to you guys that if that happens to you, be aware of it, do your normal breakfast routine and try to keep that day consistent, and then make sure that you're just having good sleep and well rested to optimize that nutrition like as soon as possible. Yeah. Same boat.
Same thing.
So it's not good.
And it's not just us. It has been documented. You reminded me of Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep. One of the studies talked about is they left these participants in this house, right? And the house is well equipped with food. All food is fairly healthy, whole grains, whole foods, except for one pantry. It's got all the treats you would love to have, chocolates, everything bad you can imagine is in those. And what they did is, I think they left it into 3 different groups. One of them was 4 hours a day sleep. The others was 6 hours a day, and the other ones, and then 8 hours a day. 3 different participants. And the ones who lacked sleep, specifically those with 4 hours sleep, made entrances to that pantry a lot more frequently, much more frequently than those with 8 hours sleep. So it's not just Robin and I giving you some anecdotal data. It has been quite well documented with leptin and ghrelin levels, and as well as microbiome reacting in different ways, especially when you're lacking food. It's a funny way of the body saying, I'm tired, give me a lot of calories to say it in a very dumb way.
Yeah.
I'm very tired. I haven't had enough sleep. Make up for it with more calories, please.
Yeah.
In a really simple way of saying it. That's how the body, I feel, thinks about it, which is not right.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
because it's not going to make up for it anyway. You're just tired. Go to sleep.
Yeah. And particularly if you're used to if you're used to training in the morning, that's where it's important, and you're used to actually eating your breakfast in training.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to be able to just sustain that normal pattern, because with training and your training program and your percentages and reps in reserve and whatever that looks like for the individual, that's really, really important. It's program designed for the older athlete, right?
Absolutely.
So like if you gave 20-year-old Marvin a strength conditioning plan versus Marvin now, which is actually not that much older if you think about it, your training program.
I'm 32 volume, now, by the way.
Everything would be, quite different, right?
It would be, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why it's so important. And sometimes you're inclined to think about your older self and what you can do. I think it's human nature and what you could execute and what you could do. And I hear it from a lot of my clients as well. The older clients, I used to do this, I did this, and did this deadlift. I did deadlift this many for this many reps. You hear it a lot of times. I sprinted 40 yards in this time and stuff. A lot of them, I think that a lot of people know that they can't execute them, but sometimes the mind thinks during a particular event or, when you're in the moment, you want to execute, your brain tells you one thing and your body's execution does not follow what the brain's saying. So your training load in general, like the volume, intensity, frequency, everything, what I do recommend is seeking professional advice and how you want to program those, because it's so important. And even if you were to seek professional advice once and try to absorb as much information as possible and try to implement what you've been taught within that session for future programming. But if you can, or if you're lucky enough to be able to have a professional with you week in, week out, that'll be absolutely gold standard, right? Because it is difficult. Like I said, it's not one size fits all. And what you're going to do during the season, your training, is not going to be the same training that you should be doing off season. That actually changes. And that's not just with older age. That's with top athletes and what people do for Olympians, what coaches do for Olympians and everything. So really, really important. And one piece of advice I'd give you is if you're thinking of changing intensity or volume or your frequency of training, please change only one and see how things go, as opposed to thinking I'm going to increase my weights by 20 kgs and I'm going to add another 3 sessions per week, and I might just increase my reps on the same week, okay? Please increase one, tailor one, and then see how things go, how the body reacts. And if you're quite good, you can make small adjustments in the other ones, one at a time. That's very, very good.
That's such good advice, yeah. Because it takes a lot longer for us to adapt to the new stimulus. If you change too much stimulus, that can go back and lead to an injury.
Yeah.
So very important for the subtle changes.
Yeah.
For us over 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, less is more. It really is. It's especially we talked about on season, off season. On season, when you're during the season training, or if you've got a jiu-jitsu comp, or if you've got a football, football season, rugby season, tennis, whatever it is about to start, or you've got a game coming weekend, less is more. It's not about you. All of a sudden, what you do in the weights room and how you perform doesn't matter so much. You're preparing for what really matters, which is that comp. So you want to be fresh. You want to be 100 or as close to 100% as possible for that day. So sometimes you'll end up leaving the gym feeling stimulated, as opposed to feeling like, man, I've just smashed this workout. My muscles are aching. I've absolutely destroyed it. Yeah, you have destroyed it, but you've also destroyed your chances on the weekend, because you're going to be so sore. Things are not going to be completely recovered. Your explosiveness, your reaction time, everything is going to be, sitting between 60 and 65%, because you haven't given enough time to recover. As opposed to leaving the gym session feeling a little bit eager, stimulated, feeling like you had another 3-4 sets that you could have really cracked, and then putting that performance on the weekend. So, and for me personally, it does take time to really gauge, not myself only, but the athletes I work with, to really see how much I can push them, how's their recovery time. And sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes we do get it wrong with some people, you know, whether we've maybe understimulated or overstimulated. Everyone's different, but you got to find that happy medium where they're just on. So when you hit the ground running for when it matters.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also like an indicative of stress, right? So that's going to also, I know that there's a lot of things that we have to factor in to be an older athlete. And I think the stress that we've talked about is huge because, you know, in your teens, you've got responsibilities of just yourself, maybe getting through uni.
Yeah.
Early 20s, you're sort of just discovering, having a bit of fun, maybe travel, that sort of thing. I think when you get over 30s, like, you know, you may be starting to like go serious with your job. You may look at getting engaged or even getting married, or, you know, looking for a house, or you may start having kids, or, you know, there's just so many things.
Absolutely.
As an older athlete, it's quite different that we didn't have to deal with. And I think that's something to regard as like, okay, so what are your stresses? What can you mitigate as a stress, and what coping strategies can be put in place to help with your training? Because I've worked with some people that they're so stressed from their job that mentally they're not at the gym. Physically, yes, they're there, and they're not focusing on what they're doing. And then depending on if you're an older athlete, you might be doing more complex moves potentially, or if you're not thinking about the sport, not thinking about what you're doing, and the mindset is not there, and you're moving at a fast pace, once again, injuries can occur.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, what are the stresses and how can you overcome them? Because I know, like for me, if I'm ever stressed, it's very, very dangerous, because if I'm doing a roll and I'm
that's
mentally not there,
rolling in jiu-jitsu,
not just rolling down a hill, rolling in jiu-jitsu, somebody could attack my arm. And if I'm not focusing and I don't tap, as an example, then that's a shoulder injury, you know? So yeah, it's very important to be like, okay, what are your stresses and how are you going to cope with them? I think it's very important at this level.
And I think you've hit it right on the head with those, I guess, with responsibilities. And as you get older, the three biggest ones or two biggest ones are your work and professional career. And sometimes there's a lot of stresses that come with that. And two is family, and also your partner specifically, and the kids and everything like that. You've got two kids, Robin.
Yeah.
You run your own business. You're busy enough as it is. What coping for work management, for example, what have you done to sort of manage or mitigate the risk of being in a high stress environment? Or what pieces of advice do you have?
I've done a few different strategies, which has been absolutely ideal, because when I look at like the different segments of my life, I look at them like different quadrants. So let's just say, for this instance, like let's say, okay, training jiu-jitsu, want to reach a high level. Cool. So that's like one of my quadrants. And then I think, okay, so how does that get affected? So then I look at family. Okay, cool. What does that involve? I'm like, okay, so wife, kids, cool. Okay, how do I spend time? What are we up to? And I actually have like a separate list about like what's urgent, important in that family sector. And now including like extended family as well. And then I look at work. Okay, what's urgent, important? Then I start making these lists here. And then I do that with different aspects of my life. And then I look, okay, so what's actually urgent, important? Okay, then I just tackle that. And then, but in my actual diary, I go even a little bit deeper and be like, okay, so these are my working hours. This is what I need to fit in with that time frame. These are my training sessions. This is non-negotiable. So example, Monday night, I have a tendency of comp training. Okay, cool. I need to work everything around that comp training, because that's really, really important. So then in my diary, I'll put in the key elements. So like I have like the girls' vocal lesson, or their piano, or their swimming. So then I start putting in the key elements, and I'll start working everything around it.
Yeah.
And that's for me, I've found that I can juggle these things, like diarizing everything, and with my urgent, important lists. I found that's helped like a lot.
So
and then
listing things and putting them out there so you can quite see them quite clearly.
And then it's non-negotiable. Like the jiu-jitsu will be like these specific days. Okay, so I got comp. So I go like a comp session, an intermediate session, and then a like technical session. Because if I go like intensity, I will break within like a week. Like there's no chance. I'm just not going to get through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've strategized that. So when you're talking about like the volume of training, even sports specific, I've got that actually mapped out as well. And then yeah, with the family side, I've got that mapped out as well. So I think having a clear plan is very important, and even putting in those rest recovery sessions. So I've got that in as part of my plan.
That's going to be your rest day. That's recovery.
Yep. So I found
cool.
that's helped a lot. It doesn't leave that much room for like flexibility. However, if you go back to like the importance or the reason why you're doing that sport, if it's like fulfilling or you're doing it for a competition, like something quite big, I found like that is quite important to have that locked into place. Yeah.
It's such an interesting, and I think when we were preparing for this podcast, it was overlooked, I guess, in terms of the stress management aspect. And you think about, stress management in sport, how does that differ with with someone who's older as opposed to someone who's younger? But it's actually such a huge difference, because simply coming back to the responsibilities, it's being an athlete. I don't know if selfish is a right word for it, but you've got to have some. When you're competing at a high level, and especially for those of you who are looking to compete at older level, at an older age, to some extent you've got to be selfish, because competition means you want to win, and wanting to win means that you're going to have to sacrifice. And with older age, if you've got kids and you've got family and work, those are going to be priority, because the work is going to feed your family, and taking care of the kids and your wife is going to be obviously the most important thing. So that's where it becomes a challenge, as opposed to a university student. Yes, your studies are important, but there is a lot more room for sacrifice. Or I guess it's easier to make those sacrifices. But when you're older and having a family and wife and kids, do you think, is there a way? For me, it's quite important to discuss this with family, right? If you're thinking like, hey, after I've got this competition or I've got this football season, it means quite a lot to me. And there's got to be some sort of common ground for you as well.
Yeah.
But I think that's such a dilemma and such a balancing act to how much time am I going to invest towards this? I know it means a lot to me, and I want to be successful in this. But at the end, family is going to be number one.
Me and Jen, we've had huge discussions before this whole sort of season for us, is that because we had to have that conversation even with the girls, so then the girls don't feel neglected, because there's so many things that you think about, like you want to spend time with them, but you really want to compete at the same time. It's like, as long as I think the discussions have been had, then you can take the selfish approach, because you need to. Like, example, instead of me staying up a little bit later, hanging out with Jen and watching TV, and this is going to sound really bad, but we've had discussions about it, like I will sleep. Like it's like, as long as, like, if I've got to get up at 5 for work, man, I'm trying to get to bed like by the latest 9 p.m. And she may just stay up like 9 or 10, where some people say, oh man, you should be like hanging out a little bit more. But we've had the discussions and we will make up time. And for me, like, competition, if you're doing it like all the time, every year, at the sacrifice of your family, then it's not worth it. But this is going to be like a one-off thing this year, and it'll become, it won't be part of our normal life at the back end of the year. So I think like, if you are juggling all these attributes, I think it's really important just to have the conversation. Like, well, it's not long term. Yeah. But once it does end, that's it, right? Our family or, career, whatever, will be like priority again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's so important to bring up and talk about. And I'm glad that you've talked about it as well. And we can almost match the two, because when we talked about diarizing, and now we've talked about discussing with Jen, and I do the same with Ellie. I'll reset and have a relook at my goals at the end of every month, and I'll write them down. And like you, how you separate them into quadrants, my goals are separated into quadrants as well.
Yep.
And even though I am trying to be successful with football and I'm trying to be successful with work and everything else, and I'll show Ellie, my wife, those particular goals that we're going to be set out together, whether it's even as simple as for this month, we're going to go going to have 2 big dates, and we're going to try spend quality time, at least this much particular time per week, quality time together.
Nice.
And you try to fit it, like you said, you put your resting and recovery times there. It's also important to put those times that you're going to spend with your kids or with your wife there as well. So you've got to work around it. And when you are training, you bet your ass you better put as much focus into that training as possible, because it's not like, if I fail here, I can just take out this date. No, that's booked in. That's part of your goals for that month. You can't. It's not.
That's your non-negotiable.
That's not prioritizing. That's stupidity. You've screwed up into your original plan. Now you're starting to muck things around. So I really like the diarizing idea, and then putting that into context with all the other goals, and discussing with the family, especially with your spouse, or husband or wife or partner. This means a lot to me. This is important. This is what I want to achieve. Is it realistic? What things can we change around to make this achievable? And this goes vice versa, because everyone, it's got different goals sometimes, especially personal goals within the family. And it's always nice to help each other achieve those goals.
Yeah. I've got something to sort of, in addition.
Yeah.
I want to talk about like the mindset, but also a stressor. So currently what I'm going through, I guess you could say, is that I got injured during a match in Sydney. And I knew I got injured, and I was like, okay, cool. But I've got another comp coming up in, I think it was about 5 weeks' time. I'll sort of settle and rest for 3 to 4 days, and then I'm just back into it. So 2 things I was thinking about it, like going into when we're sort of looking and discussing about this project, is that 2 things came out of it. It's like, that's a huge stress, me getting injured, missing out on training, but I've got the mindset to push through it. So then I guess, is it stupid having such a strong mindset to be able to push through it and knowing that I'm injured and keep on going? And is it stupid to think about, I'm missing out on the training, when I think long-term goal, I've got like 4 months, 5 months to recover? That's a stressor of missing out on training, but a very strong mindset was actually detrimental to my recovery.
To your recovery. And it's a tough decision. And that's why I stress so much that it's so important to listen to your body. And sometimes you have to bite the bullet, sometimes it might feel like, should I get shot or should I get hung? It's just 2 bad options. And it's nice to have someone else, hear it from someone else, and to make someone else make that decision for you. It's, I guess, take that decision away and let someone else make it for you, because it is very hard. Either way, it's not nice, and you'll have to deal with some negativity and some bad feelings. But I think listening to your body and thinking about the bigger goal or bigger picture, it ends up being the winner in that option. And sometimes, look, it's big, sometimes it's huge. And I've dealt, and you see it with a lot of athletes, sometimes, they're working up towards, for example, Football World Cup is a big one because it happens once every 4 years. And sometimes you'll get a 32, 34-year-old footballer who's been playing very, very well, and they have an ACL injury. And they know damn well that that's their last World Cup, because they're going to be 39 in the next 4 years' time.
Yeah,
that was their last shot to have that, and they've been looking forward to it, and they've found good form. And it's tough, and sometimes I guess, having an ACL is almost, the decision is made for you, but sometimes having a smaller niggle is more tough. It's a tougher decision, and sometimes I hate those, in a funny way, you hate those injuries more, because it's a really nasty tendinopathy, which is a kind of a really aggravated tendon that can cause quite a lot of pain and reduce performance. And sometimes it's a very difficult decision because you can say, I could do this, I could do that, I can do everything to hide the pain. And you end up playing like shit in the competition, and you're like underperforming, and you question yourself, was it worth pushing through? Was it worth lying to my medical staff? And some people do that, they lie because they want to get into there. I'm fine, I'm feeling good, and then tearing inside and crying from how painful it is. Such a difficult decision to make, and difficult because it doesn't have a really nice option or a happy ending. And but I think part of being older and wiser should hopefully allow you to step back and look into it. And we talked about this earlier in terms of the benefits of being older and being an older athlete. And there are benefits, and I've seen them for sure, especially. And it's kind of balancing your loss of physical prowess with the increased game IQ or intelligence or experience that you've gained throughout time. Not only about the game, but how you perform and how you like to prepare, what makes you confident, what makes you ready. Those things take time to learn, and you learn about your body and you learn about your mentality and what gets you prepared for a match. Do you like music? Do you like having this particular meal? Some people have rituals, whatever it is that prepares you for that match, and that takes time for you to prepare. So you do lose physical prowess, absolutely. It's happening, like I said, in a biochemical way. We cannot change that to a great degree. We can preserve it to as much as we can, which is what we've talked about today. But your physical performance is going to slightly decline. But your intelligence and how you perform, and sometimes even during the game, during a particular jiu-jitsu session in the mats or a competition, or you're fighting someone, or a football match. Back then, when I was in my 20s, I would have sprinted made particular runs, or defended, or attacked and moved in certain ways that were high energy, but not necessary. Whereas now I'd make particular moves that are a lot more concise and precise and needed, and what's not needed, I'll take away. And sometimes those shortcuts make me actually a bit more dangerous and more explosive, and when it matters, as opposed to just wasting energy just because, I've got it, And so I think that's huge, as well as dealing with different teammates, learning your position, understanding the opposition's mindset is a huge thing as well. And you learn a lot about mindset as you grow, and knowing when you've got them broken, and knowing particular nuances that your opposition does, that you've got them in your pocket. And those things are very difficult to teach. It's just something you're going to have to experience and see with your own eyes, and experience with your own feeling, to be able to execute. But I think that's huge. And I joke with Robin sometimes, and I said, if I knew and I had the mentality I have now and the physical prowess I had when I was 21, I would have made it pro. And I think that's what makes the difference. It's people who advance when their mindset is such a young age. And for some reason, you watch them, a lot of rugby league players or footballers or anything, you look at them young, and it's weird. It's almost like he knows something that the others don't. And I think that's what separates them from the rest. And I think that really comes down to mindset.
Yeah, most definitely. I fully agree. The nuances that you know for yourself is just developed through trial and error. There's so many different, even this year alone, just with so many different competitions, it was my 4th comp this year. I realized I actually like wearing headphones. And I like to be zoned out. I don't like to be spoken to. I like to be so internal. And that was just like from experience as well. Yeah. But then even what we just discussed for you and I today, all our recovery sessions, how we train. We've got so much theoretical knowledge. There's so much research to it. But what we've done and what we've produced through trial and error, man, you cannot beat that time.
You cannot teach it either. It's just, you need to just go through it, experience it.
And I think like, if you think about the amount of hours that you put into your sport or to your craft to have that higher sporting IQ, then you could say to a younger individual, that's why the hours will count. The hours of training, the hours of like gameplay, is going to be absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. And it's a longevity thing, you know. It's when we talk about hours of training, it doesn't mean you're putting in 18 hours a day, because if you do, you'll get injured and you're out for 3 months. Then all of a sudden, the people who are putting in 8 hours a week, they're going to catch up and they're going to take over. And then you're going to come and you're like, oh my God, this person's catching up. I need to put 6 hours a day in training. And then you get injured for another 2 months. And these people, and if you do that within 21 years time, 25 years, if someone's had a career of 25 years with minimal injuries, and another individual who's worked so hard but has had 2 or 3 catastrophic injuries, that person with 25 years with minimal injury is going to make huge ground. And that's what it comes down to. That's why injury management is so tightly knit to performance. Because sometimes when you do less, you can preserve your body, you can keep training for a longer time, and you can do it for 60, 70 years, you know, and you could be ongoing and you can be high performing at that older age, you know. So that's why it's so important, and to understand that less is more sometimes.
Yep. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Particularly for us older athletes.
It is.
So if we're going back through, right? Okay, so as an older athlete, so we've spoken about conditioning, including like muscle strength, preparing yourself for your specific movement. So that's one tick for the individuals.
Yeah.
We need to be looking at joint mobility, stretching, flexibility, which is going to be crucial for injury prevention management. The 4 pillars that you were talking about before. So make sure as an older athlete, you're looking at sleep, stress mitigation, nutrition and exercise.
Correct.
So looking through those pillars there. We've talked about stress. So what are your stresses? We could diarize or put them into quadrants.
Yep. Work, family, kids.
Yep. I want to add with the mindset.
Yes.
Even if you've got a very strong mindset to push through, learning from experiences, like I think it's very important that be the athlete, let someone else be the rehab provider. So if you are injured, I highly seek that you go see a specialized rehab provider. It could be physio, also whatever you're into, just make sure somebody is giving you the right advice.
Yeah.
And then if you need to rest. If you need to train, and you can be ticked off to train, then train. But do not push through the injury, because then you're going to counter the rehealing process and it's going to take you much longer to recover and you're going to be out of action for much longer.
Talking about mindset that we've talked about, I'm going to inverse it and ask you, we've talked about injury prevention. Sometimes it's inevitable. Things go wrong. Things happen, whether it was due to your lack of prehabilitation and conditioning, or freakish things happen in the world of sport and you do get injured. What's the approach? Because a lot of the times you hear it from especially older athletes or older people who are at a high performance level. They say, I knew this would happen, I'm too old. Or sometimes they'll have the mindset of, what's the point, you know? Or I've got a bad knee, I can't do this. Or I've got a bad back, I can't do this anymore because of my bad back. Whatever it is, it's an injury that happened back when Moses was still alive.
Yeah.
And then they've had this, and it's almost like an ideology they have now that this is not my zone because I've got a bad knee or a bad hip. How do you approach clients like that, and how do you approach injuries as well at your age, that you're at this age now? You're still in your 20s.
Mindset anyway.
Yeah.
No, that's such a good question. So if somebody's to say, okay, let's just say we're saying, bad back as an example, and it's disabling them from being able to participate in the sport that they really want to do. My initial question to somebody is like, okay, do you want to participate in the sport still? Do you still love that activity? Is that like your goal? If you had no back problems? If the answer is yes, okay, we're going to resolve the back problem. Yeah. Okay, what is the problem with the back? And then this is where, they'll come and see us or advise, go see someone that can actually help you in that space, a strength conditioning coach, physiotherapist as an example. Because it won't be the back that's stopping you. It will be how could I resolve the back to get me back into the game? And this is how people want to think.
So it's that mindset switch.
Yeah, you need to change it 100%. And the thing is that if you're not looking at that, like the solution to the problem, and then you can't participate in the sport, what else are you willing to give up because of that injury or that niggle? And then if you have to ask yourself, okay, what else is going to spiral downwards? And then what's going to be associated effect from not being able to participate in the sport? Because time and time again, I see it so much. So as an example, working with this lady, ankle foot problem, wants to return back to hockey. Already, so there's actually quite a few underlying things that's going to take us a few months to actually resolve. So her mindset, so I've actually got to keep her on track and positive because she's already starting to spiral downwards. So she's not around her social circle. She doesn't have anything to sort of look forward to on the sad day. She's missing twice a week of training. She's putting on weight. She's feeling sluggish. Her body's starting to stiffen up. She said her body feels softer. Muscle mass is starting to be lost. Like there's this quite an extensive list that's going through this lady. So she's in her late 40s. Yeah, late 40s. And real awesome lady, but you can already see things are starting to spiral down. But the cool thing is we've actually made some advancements. So we're back to like low level drills as an example. So we're starting to go on that onwards. So to answer your question is that resolve the limiting factor, period. It doesn't matter what it is. So if it's not an injury, if it's like work-related stress, resolve it.
Yeah.
Like there will always be a way to help you push forward to stay a mature older athlete.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. And sometimes guys, girls, your first, it wasn't your choice. You had no chance sometimes because your first experience when you initially had that injury, your first primary healthcare experience may have been a bad experience, may have been something that's kind of constructed this theory or this ideology in your head in the first place that's kind of been made concrete all over those years. It may have been bad advice or particular words a health practitioner or health professional used to explain your back injury and knee injury that may have been led you to down a road where you think this is inevitable and that there's nothing that can be done, and it gives you a feeling of helplessness, you know.
Yep.
And so please, I do encourage you, ask your friends, ask family, or your social circle if they know any good health practitioner. Go see more than one. Go see 2, 3. You're free to do so. There is help out there. There's so many knowledgeable, amazing health practitioners, physiotherapists, whatever they may be, even strength and conditioning coaches that can do a world of a difference. They can really light your world up and really make you see or help you see, change that perspective and that mindset that Robin was talking about. I think that's absolutely crucial to look at, and don't be down and out. Injuries do happen. And like Robin said, this particular patient was 40 years and over and still performing at a high level. So I think to finish off on this podcast, I would like to just add and emphasize that regardless how old you are, you could still be performing at a high level, you know, in accordance to your age, of course. But we've seen amazing things, and now with the technology and understanding and the research that we've done and that's out there, you're seeing athletes perform at such an older level. There's professional athletes in their early 40s and playing in professional leagues and high level, and not saying just performing in terms of floating, but they're actually doing quite well. Like, you know, there's in the top of the leaderboards in particular aspects and performance-wise, and it's amazing to see. And it really shines light on older athletes and showing you what, preserving your body and doing everything right, especially with the pillars. You can really perform at a high level. You can mitigate, reduce the risk of injury. You can recover from injury still quite well. And you can perform into your late 40s, So in the football field as well, 50s.
Yep.
And enjoy that, enjoy that aspect. And we were made to run. We were made to change directions. We were meant to pull up and do this sort of things. So enjoy your body. It's not the end, just make the most out of it.
Yeah. Here's to us, the older athletes.
Yeah. Cheers. And hopefully you've gathered something from this podcast.
Yes.
And we'll see you next time.
Keep training. Are you trying to make this a challenge? Holy hecker.